will be writing reports. So let me first share my screen with you people, and then I will continue with the lecture. So is my screen visible to everyone? Is the screen
Yes, ma'am.
visible? Okay, thank you. So as we people are moving further, so till now we have discussed about the paragraph writing. What are the components of the paragraph writing? What are the nature of paragraph writing? As well as now today I'm going to start up with a new topic, and that topic is writing reports, or how we report a kind of an event. So in this unit, I will introduce you the subject of report writing, and I will be talking about how to report any event. Then we are going to discuss that how many types of reports are there, how do we write, how do we report a survey, how do we report an experiment, how do we report an interview, so how do we report an event. So we are going to discuss this topic in a very elaborative way. And then further, I will continue with how to write a summary. So these are the two major agendas which we people are going to discuss today with the students. So first of all, coming to the first one, that is what is a report. So when we people are talking about what a report is, if we people are talking about what is the epistemology of a report. So when we people talk about report, though we use this term so many times that we are writing a report, we are making a kind of a report as a student life goes on. Sometimes we make certain kind of the reports. But how do we define? Because it is a very important part of a written communication. And when we define a report is something which is being defined as an organized, factual, and objective presentation of information. That is, it is something which is being quoted over here also, or another definition which can be given. A report can be considered as a communication from someone who has some kind of an information to someone who wants to use that information. Got it? So here, wherever we people are talking about any kind of an information. So that information is something which is organized, it is something which is factual, it is something which has a kind of a specific objective, as well as it has a piece of information. So that means that information is something which is being shared. So now, if we are talking about what this organization is, so where we people are talking about organization, or where we people are talking about objective. So organized means that the report, the content of a report which we people are making, it should be very, very systematic. It should have a kind of a brief structure. Secondly, where we people are talking about objective. So objective is that where we have to influence someone. That is why in the first line it is being mentioned that some piece of information to someone who wants to use that information. So that is how we make a kind of a report. So whenever we write a report, what we do, we try to convey some information to other. So that is something where in a report it may contain opinion, but these opinions are something which are based on facts. Or what we people can say, it can be based on a kind of an investigation, as a result of investigation, or that report can be based on any kind of your experience. So that is how we make any kind of a report. This is report making is something which we people have seen, um, like if we are making a kind of a story, that means the story is not something like that means a news stories, that means where we take a kind of a coverage, that can be any kind of a thing, like we can say it can be any kind of a scientific article, it can be research paper, survey report, or any kind of a business report. So that is something which we people can say that any kind of a composition which is based on a factual information, that can be considered as a report. So now where we people are talking about how do we write a report, the next question which should come inside your mind first is what is a report, and then the next question should be how one writes a report. So since it is a kind of a serious task, it's not something where we can use any kind of a flattery language. It is something which is very formal. It is something which is very systematic, and it is something which is based on a specific topic or specific subject, which is in an organized form. So that is how we make a report. And whenever we brief it out, so we call report, we divide report into different kind of the stages. The one stage, it has three stages: stage one, stage two, stage three. Because here, wherever, why do we use these kind of facts? Because any kind of a report, it presents us kind of a snapshot of facts, event, opinion, which is important in writing. And that is why, and always a report, like it is very simple and it is very common whenever we go to a hospital. So sometimes whenever we go to a hospital for a medical test, so either we want a kind of a blood test or any kind of a full body checkup. So for that, there is a kind of a report which is being generated. That is how it is something which is based on certain kind of the facts, certain kind of the numbers. So that is how that report is being generated. So report is something which is based on a study. It is something which can be based on a kind of a learning. So that is how we make a report. So if we are forming any kind of a report, okay, so here this slide shows you that what is basically a structure of a report. So whenever we people are talking about what should be a structure of a report, as I told you, the structure, that means structure or the stages of a report. So report can be of three stages. At stage one, first we have to know about one thing, that what information is supposed to be conveyed. That question should be the first. The second stage is that whether we have gathered relevant material from different kind of sources or not. So that is the second step. And now when we write a kind of an outline, that means first we just have to work on the fact, because see, as I gave you the example, that if we have to make a kind of a report based on any kind of a blood test, so that means that is something that is a kind of a medical report. For that, we have to go to the hospital where we have to give our blood, and then finally they are going to take it out that this is what is your HP level, what is the other kind of the level. So this is how a report is being generated. Platelets, any kind of a thing is something which is being calculated. So that is a kind of a systematic thing. So that is where we can say that, oh, we need a kind of a report. So that report is something that means for that we need an outline. So first, we have the outline, we have a background. Then what we do? Report is something which consists of three major parts. One is the introduction, second is the main body, and third one is the conclusion. So the most So maximum time, this is what we people have seen, that the main part is the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. So here, whenever we people are talking about the introduction, we should state the subject and the purpose of the report. So that is something which is very, very important, that what comes in introduction. The second thing, that is where we give a kind of a background information. So whenever we are writing the body of a report, okay, the main body. So the main body should present a detailed and an organized account of any subject of a record. So that is what we see. And the third thing which is important, and wherever we people are talking about the body or the main content, so it consists, it can include figures, it can include tables, it can include graphs, it can include any kind of a chart as a supporting evidence. And the last thing which is being required in a conclusion. So conclusion is something that means where we summarize all the observation which we people have made, and then finally we give a kind of a recommendation or any kind of a suggestion. So that is how we formulate the structure of a report. Like any kind of, for example, if I want to give you an example, that you have to make a kind of a structure of any kind of a report. So that can be anything, like you have to make a kind of a report on a fire accident. That is something that is up to you how you are going to make. Or the question which comes, the targeted questions which come in exam, it can be like you are the cultural secretary of the student union in your college. So what you have to do, you have to make a kind of an annual report. So this is how there is a kind of a topic which is being suggested to you, and as per the topic, you all have to make the report. So that is how we people do it. So that is how. So this is where, that is whenever we are framing a kind of a report, always remember that we always focus on a target audience. Like it can be, see, this is already, there are certain kind of the example which is given on the slide also, that means reporting about a school event or report about any kind of a business case. So that is how we make any kind of a structure of a report. First of all, wherever we are making a report, whenever we make or whenever we frame any kind of a report, so reports are something which is always being based on certain kind of the things. That means, first of all, since we people had made a kind of an outline, so that means you should be aware of one thing. That means always remember that language is something which is very, very important. What is the importance of a report that is being given over there? That means it is a conveyor of an information. Why do we need a report? It helps a management to review and evaluate any office operation. So that is why we need any kind of a report. Then it is a tool of measuring performance. How do we perform? So that is via reports. Another thing, that means if we have a kind of a systematic report, it helps in making a desirable change. So that is also important why reports are necessary for us. And it also is something which is important for measuring the effectiveness of an organization. So that is something like, we know that there is a kind of a topic which is being given to us, and on that topic we have to make a report, we have to write a report. So first of all, there are certain kind of the rules which are very, very important when we make any kind of a report, because since it is a very systematic kind of an approach, So always remember these are some essential points which are important for a good report. So first of all, always remember that whenever we are writing to communicate with other, we are communicating. It is not to impress or not to mystify them. There should be no confusion. So that is why these are some essential rules which are important for a good report. So first of all, whenever we are making a report, number one, the first point which should be there in any kind of a person is accuracy. Accuracy means be clear, because you have to be clear in your writing. It should be definite. It should not be vague. You should always avoid ambiguity. Now, what do you mean by ambiguity? Ambiguity means whenever we are using any kind of a word or a sentence that can be understood in one or more way. So that is why whatever words we are using, that should be very, very clear. That should be very, very accurate. The second point, which is there, is always be simple. Simplicity. Okay. So simplicity is something that means whenever we are trying to say one thing at one time, we have to say it briefly and directly. We cannot overload, because sometimes overloaded sentences can make a kind of a confusion. So, in a sentence, do not use those kind of a words which are not required. So, language should be very, very simple. Always try to avoid unnecessary word. Another thing, sentence should be complete. It should not be like in a kind of a continuation. Okay, so that is also very important. Another thing is brevity. So here where the people are talking, that means sometimes what happen, a word which may not sound well if it is repeated too often. So first of all, if we are continuously repeating one sentence which doesn't sound well in a very proper manner, so what we can do instead of that, we can just change that subject, or we can use any kind of a synonym. Okay, so that can also be used when we people are making a kind of a report, because um, sometimes what happens, awkward kind of a repetition occurs. So how we people can change it? We people can change it by rewriting any kind of that sentence. If we rewrite that sentence, then that can be done. Appearance is something where everything which is being present, it should be in a systematic manner. So that is how we use. So whenever we are utilizing, we cannot do any kind of a repetitiveness. Readability, readability and reliability. So readability means that whatever content we are producing, that means this piece of information is something which we are going to make it for the other. So it should be in a kind of a readable kind of a condition. Reliability is something that means if we have quoted any kind of a source, or if we are working on any kind of something, that means any kind of a survey or a field-based knowledge, if we are working on numbers, make sure that the numbers which you are presenting, the source which you are quoting, it should be reliable. So that is why these are some kind of essential points which are required in a report. Then time management is also very important. Your um, report should not exceed too much. It should not be lengthy. It should be within. It should have a kind of the world limit. So that is something which is very, very important. And then whatever content you are producing, it should always have a kind of a logical content. Okay. So now the next thing which we people are going to talk about, we people will be talking about the types of the report. So even though it is very rigid, how do we classify any kind of a report? So since I will be just focusing on the report making, which is given in your prescribed syllabus, that is FEG02. So I will be just focusing on those kind of the reports. I will not be exceeding my limit apart from that. So here, first of all, these are certain kind of the examples of the report like we have seen. There are plenty of reports. That means we have the news report, we have an academic report. These are the types of the report. We have the meeting report, we have the speeches report, we have a market survey report, we have a laboratory or experimental report, or we have an internal inquiry report. So the reports which are being suggested as per your syllabus, those are like reporting an event where we make a kind of a report of an event, or a report of that is speech or meeting, that is also which is being given over there in the slide. Then how to make a report on any kind of an interview. So that is what we are going to discuss. And then reports of survey and reports of experiment. So we are going to talk about that. So first of all, the first topic, which is where we people are going to mention that how do we report, make a kind of a report of any event. So as I gave you the example that if we have to make a kind of a report which is based on uh, any kind of an event, so that can be considered as like there is a kind of a fire accident. So now you have to make a kind of a report on that accident. So that is a kind of a report which has come in. That is something that comes under the media coverage. That means there is a fire and we have to make a kind of a report, and that comes in the newspaper. So uh, when we people are talking about this kind of a report, like reporting any kind of an event, so we met so many kind of an incidents in our day-to-day life. Like for example, any kind of a work which we do, or any kind of an accident, or any kind of an equipment failure. So that can occur in any kind of a place of a work where you do any kind of a thing. So sometimes what happens, we have to write a report on such kind of an accident so that the causes can be determined, and there are certain kind of the necessary steps which should be taken in order to prevent that these kind of mishappenings should not take place again. So sometimes what happens whenever we are making a kind of a report, so these report on any kind of an accident can be used by the police, or it can be used by the court for inquiring into a matter. So that is why the report, which can be considered as an accident report, it is usually uh, called, and it should always be prepared as promptly and accurately as possible. So, like, I give you an example, like that is something where we people are talking about news report or event report is one and the same thing. Don't get confused with the title. So here, like suppose as I gave you the example that suppose you have to make a kind of a report on any kind of an accident. So when we are making a kind of a report on an accident, so what all things we have to describe over there? We have to describe the physical injury. What are the, if there is any kind of a physical injury which has happened, or any kind of property damage which might have caused it. Again, If we are making a kind of a report, it should include all the details of time, date, and place of accident. So all these things are important. Okay, so this is in my next slide, you will see the procedure of the report writing. So this is how we people make a kind of a report. That means, number one, as I gave you the example, that if there is a kind of an accident case which has happened, so first of all, any kind of a physical injury or any kind of a property damage which might have caused it, or time, date, place. Okay, then who are the witness, the source of information. Try to get on these kind of the fact. Then what were the main major reason why this accident happened? So that also you have to frame in your report writing. And finally, you have to give your suggestion or any kind of a recommendation for the prevention of recurrence of that accident. So that is how the report is something which can be an exact and objective and support everything, support whatever you are saying or whatever you are producing or whatever you are writing with certain opinion of the fact. So that is how we make a kind of a report in uh, if we are making a kind of a report which is based on any kind of an event. So that is where we do it, and that is how we make it. So that is like this is something which is being mentioned over here also. That means these are the procedure of the report writing and which involves the major step, and these are the steps. That means first of all you have to determine the purpose of a report, then you have to identify the receivers, then you have to collect the data which is important, which is relevant, which is necessary. Then you have to analyze and classify that data, and then you have to make a kind of an outline of that report. And finally, you have to see whenever we are making a kind of a report, first of all, we have to revise that report also. We have to see, we have to recheck it that because we have to submit that report to someone else, to authority. So we have to briefly analyze that whatever the content of our report is, it should be very proper, it should be logical, it should be based on fact, and then only we can produce that report in front of the other person. Okay, so it should be factual and it should be original. So that is what can be considered as the main process of report writing. Another thing, before I go further, so here there is in another unit, there is another kind of an example which is being mentioned. That means the first one which I was talking about was event report. So this is how we formulate the event report. The second is how do we formulate any kind of a report which is based on meeting and which is based on speech. So here in this, I'm going to talk about how to make the report, first of all, of a meeting or any kind of a speech. So here, if we people are working in any kind of an organization, we know that very periodically there are certain kind of the speeches which are being made by different officials. And if you are the employee of your organization, if you are working, so that means it is required to make a report of these kind of speeches or these kind of reports or meetings. So how you are going to make a report which is based on a speech or a meeting? So whenever we are reporting a meeting, always remember, that means as I told you, this is something which is being mentioned. That means what will be the procedure of a report writing? So that means you should, in the very beginning, you should give the precise information about everything. If you are working in an organization and if you have to report a meeting, please note down. That means, first of all, there are few points which are very, very important. The name of the organization. Second, the venue and the time of meeting. Third, the agenda or the program. And then the brief history of your organization. So that is something which is important when we are reporting a meeting. Uh, so that is, and if we are reporting on a meeting, it can include any kind of a topic, it can include any kind of subject, anything which is there. It can include graph, it can include tables. Okay, so that is how we formulate reporting a meeting. Second thing, if we are making a kind of a report which is based on a speech. So speech can be like if we have to report for a speech. So first of all, if we are making a report which is based on a speech reports. So there are few things which are very, very important if we have to make. That means again, identification of the speaker is something which is important. Where what is the occasion of speech? Then what is the exact time and place? That is something which is to be mentioned. And what is the title of the speech? So that is how you are going to make a report which is based on a speech. As I told you, where we people were talking about the meeting, in which organization you are working, what is the venue and what is the time, what is the agenda of the program, and what is the brief history of your organization. All these things should be included in a kind of a report. Or if there is a kind of a speech, then see, all the examples are something which has been given in your FEG2. Please go through those examples. Please practice those examples at home. I'm just giving you a kind of a structure because all these things cannot be explained within a limited time frame. So it is up to you that you have to do that homework. You have to go through your assignment. You have to make the assignment. The concept is clear to you, and you just have to formulate it. You just have to implement it when you are practicing it, when you are self-studying it. So here, this is what we have seen, that if we are making a kind of a report which is based on a speech, so that means educate information, identification of the speaker, what is the occasion of the speech, what is the exact time and place, and any kind of a title which is being mentioned. So all these things should be there. Another thing, sometimes we experience that we used to try to make notes during lectures. Why? Because it helps us report a speech. This is what happens, that whenever there is a kind of a lecture which is being delivered, all the students, what they do, they try to make a kind of a report, or they just try to make a kind of a summary, or they just try to take a kind of a note which is being presented right in front of them, or any kind of a lecture which is being given in front of them. So that is how we make a kind of a report which is based on all these kind of the information. So that is what we people have done, that if we are making a kind of a report on any kind of a meeting, we should give a precise information about the organization, about the venue, agenda of the meeting. If we are framing another thing, that means you should always report not only the final decision but also the argument which are being produced by various speakers. So that is something which is important when we sum up, when we make any kind of a report which is based on a meeting. Third is something where what are the items, or what are the your takes. So that is something which is there. If it is a kind of a business meeting, you should be aware. And then you should quote certain kind of the statements which are being given by the important participants in the meeting. Or if they, you can also include any kind of the chart or any kind of a table, whatever is necessary for you. Okay. Then when we are summing up, when we are making a kind of a report which is based on a speech, always you should give a kind of a precise information about a speaker. Then we have to give an information about the occasion for the speech. While anyone listens to the speech, if there is a kind of a speech which is being delivered, we have to jot down the notes. In my next I'm going to talk about note taking also, how to write a note. So that is again after this, we will be talking about that, how we make a note. Then after the speech had been made, you should organize your notes, and then you should select the most significant point in a speech and arrange other points in order of their importance. So that is how. Sometimes what happens, the reporters or those people who are making a kind of a, they take a kind of a tape recorder. They do a kind of a recording, and then what they, through that recording, they make the report. So sometimes we cannot depend entirely on the tape recorder also, but it is something, it is mere your understanding how you make a report. So that is, and the examples which or the questions which you people will be giving, which you people will be getting in exams, that will be either, it will be in a form of, if you just look towards the exam centric point of view, or the assignment centric point of view. So in that, you will get a kind of a speech. You have to read that speech, and then you have to make a report accordingly. That is how, or what we can say, you will get a kind of an headline and that topic, and on that topic you have to make a report, or you will be given certain kind of the pinpoints, so that through those points you have to make any kind of a report. So this is how we people make a report. So now we are just coming to the next segment, and that is, how do we make a kind of a report which is based on a survey? So that is again another type of uh, the type of a report which is being mentioned in your syllabus, and again it is something which is very very important. So how do we frame or how do we write a report which is based on a survey? So sometimes what happens, first of all, let us see what the survey is. The survey report is a document whose purpose is to convey the information acquired during the survey in a whole and objectively. So the report includes all of the results that were gathered. So this kind of a survey, the survey sometimes happen when we conduct any kind of an election, like a survey can be done on population, a survey can be done on education sector, that survey can be done on any kind of a field survey. So there, how do we, through any kind of a survey, how do we make a kind of a report? So that is how we convey that kind of an information. So this is how uh, a report, this kind of a report is something which, like for example, you might be asked for an instance to conduct an opinion survey among customers about the sales of a particular product. You have to check what is the price. You have to check uh, uh, that whether this price ranges between the different companies, what are the charges which different companies take um, for that product. So that will be a kind of a survey, and that could be based on the study, and that is how you will make your own report. So wherever we people are making a kind of a survey, so always remember these are different kind of the stages when we are conducting a survey. Okay, so first of all, stage one, stage two, stage three. Okay, so here what does it means? In stage one, survey reports are produced in response to a specific demand. That means it is something which is based on a clear instruction that is called as a term of reference, which will tell you what you are required to do. So that is something which can be considered as stage one. Second stage is like a report is always written with an audience in the mind. See, it is something which you have to, it is a kind of a piece of an information for someone else, which somebody else will read that information. So always you have to keep your audience in mind, and then only you have to frame that report. So in some cases, it may be just your immediate boss who requires information or any aspect of a work for which you are connected. So that is why, so as I was telling this thing, that means here it is the report which you have to submit. It is very, very audience centric. So that means where we people can categorize the audience. The audience can be anything. That can be your superiors, that can be your colleagues, that can be any kind of an organization which is being engaged in similar kind of an activities, as well as it can be kind of a report which you have to submit in front of the consumers. So that is how we make a report that is based on a survey. So that is where it becomes important. And the third stage, that means if your report is something which is based on any kind of an instruction from an individual, so that means it will be difficult for you to find any kind of an objective. So the presentation style and the style of your report depends on your reader. So that is why you have to cater it in front of the reader. You have to cater your report with the needs of a varied readership. So you should make sure, that means that the people whom you are catering these information, they should be well aware of your subject. So they should be knowing that what you are presenting in front of them. So that becomes very, very important. Then come the final stage. That means after the objectives have been defined and the audience is fixed, then the next step is to gather the relevant data. So that is something which becomes very, very important, that you have to gather all the relevant data. So that becomes very important. So here, from where in a survey, how you are going to collect your data. So from where you are using it. So there are a number of methods and sources which will help you in collecting data. So that can be anything, that can be based on your personal observation, that can be based on the interview, that can be based on questionnaires, official records, or library. Sometimes what happens where we people are talking about the personal observation. So what does it mean? Data which is based on your personal observation. So how do we define? So that is, suppose you have to conduct an opinion survey. That means opinion survey, that means you have launched a kind of any kind of a product. Okay. any product, and now you have to get a kind of an opinion that whether the consumers who have used it, who have gone through that product, are satisfied, are they happy or not. Okay, so that is how we are going to make it. So when you meet these kind of the people, you should study not only their words, but what are their body gestures. That is also very, very important. And if it is something which is based on your personal observation, you should develop a kind of a habit of careful observation of accurate recording. So that is something which is important. Next is interviews. So what comes in interview? It is another method of collecting our data, and interviewing is an art and demand which requires courtesy, it requires patience, and how do you tact on your part. So that is something which comes important when we make a kind of a report which is based on interview. Then comes the questionnaires. So the questionnaires is something that means if you have to get a kind of an information which is based on um, so many people, that means there will be random questions, and random questions which will, like sometimes we fill the Google form, so in Google form there are so many random questions which are being asked to us, and then we have to rate it, that 1 2 3 4 5. So how we are going to rate it? So that can be either a kind of a feedback form, or it can be any kind of that how do you like it or not. So that is how you are going to mention it. So that is something which is based on the questionnaires. So you have to take utmost care if you have to make a kind of a report which is based on these kind of a survey. So you have to be very, very particular, because the questionnaires which are there, you cannot give further clarification, but you have to go through a kind of a systematic approach, and that is how to formulate a questionnaire. Next is something which is known as the official record. So every organization records the activity in written form. Okay, so that means if we have to get, so all the things are being documented. If we may do a kind of an, if we organize a kind of an event or anything, that is always being documented, like official record. For example, I can say that if there is a kind of a meeting, so there will be a kind of a memorandum, there can be letters, there can be contracts, there can be any kind of an agreement. So these are certain kind of the official record. So if we are making a kind of a survey report, so we might require these kind of the records. And then comes the library. So library is somewhere where we find all the books and the journals on different topics. So even if you are collecting certain kind of the data, so sometimes libraries are something which becomes very, very helpful. So that is how we formulate it. Now this is how we report any kind of a survey. So this is something which is a kind of a structure of a survey, and through this you will understand, and this is the basic structure through which you will understand that how we are going to frame the other reports also. So this is where they are talking about that survey reports, especially long and complex reports, require a carefully planned structure. So sometimes the structure is something which should be very planned so that it may help the reader. And that is why if a report is very lengthy, we divide it into three parts, and that is where we segregate it into parts and subparts. So that is where we can see that we can find the front matter, we can find the body, we can find the back matter, each of which in turn contains certain elements. So that is how we systematically make the content of the report. So this is till now where we people were talking about how to make a report based on a speech, how to make a report which is based on an event, how to make a report which is based on an event or a meeting. So that is where the content were very less. They were very systematic: place, time, cause. So all these, that means 4 or 5 points were something which were important. But if we are making, if we, our report is something which is based on a survey, that is a very lengthy kind of an issue, and that is uh, that means that if we are making, so that means it the structure should be like this: the front matter. Like if there is a front matter, the front matter should contain the title page, because the front matter serve for several purposes. It gives the reader a general idea of what a report is and what is author's purpose of writing. So that is why it very briefly gives you an illustration, and then the reader get a kind of a chance to determine whether the report contains all the kind of the information whatever he's trying to seek or not. Okay, because if you just look towards the front matter, you will see that first thing which it contain is the title page. So title page should be, it should contain the full title of the report. Then it should contain who is the principal investigator or the author name. Then the title page includes when we have submitted that report, and finally the name of the organization with whom the author has worked. So all these are included in the front matter. Then where we people are talking about the preface. So preface can be considered as a kind of a statement by the author of a purpose which has a background or any kind of a scope. So that is in a preface, it may contain any kind of an acknowledgement or a help which we people are have received. In sometimes we say that we would like to thank this department who had helped us in organizing or in making this kind of a survey. So that is how we make a kind of a preface. Okay, sometimes if a matter is something which is copyrighted, okay, so we can also mention that we can also acknowledge, or we can also cite the permission which we have obtained for the use of any kind of a copyright material. So that is something which comes in a preface. Then comes the table of content. So where we people are talking about the table of content, they contain all the section, it contains all the sections of the report, how they are being organized, the order of appearance, along with the page number. Then comes the list of illustration. Illustration is something, if we are briefing any kind of a report, as I was telling you earlier, it should contain a tables, chart, which page you have mentioned, which chart you have mentioned, if you have used any kind of a picture or a drawing, so that should also be mentioned in the list of illustration. And then summary is something which include, it is if we are briefing any kind of a summary, so it should be very in a very small manner, hardly 100 to 150 word is something which is being required, so that this any kind of a reader who is reading that report is able to understand it. Then comes the body, main body. So main body is something which includes introduction, discussion, and the conclusion and recommendation. So these are your viewpoints. If you are making any kind of a report which is based on a survey, so it should include all these points where we are saying that in introduction, the main function of an introduction is to say what the report is all about. So you have to mention what are the subjects, what are the new grounds which is being covered in your present study. So that is something which is included in our introduction. Then comes the discussion. So discussion is something which the main function of this part is to present the collected data in an organized form and analyze the result of the survey. And then any kind of a remark or any kind of a recommendation which is being made by you is something which is included in the conclusion. That means on the basis of the analysis of the data presented in the report, that will give your suggestion. So your suggestion for the future course of action is something which is based on these kind of the format. Then comes the back matter. Back matter is the last content of the report where we are giving things. That means what are the list of references, what are the bibliography, what is the appendix, what is the glossary. So all these things should be mentioned. So if we are talking about what are the list of reference, like here, this is where we people are talking about that if we have taken any kind of a permission or any kind of a data which we have presented in our report, which is being based on a copyright work. So that is where in list of reference in your report, you have to refer to the material and you have to quote it directly whether your work is a published or it is unpublished, or you have to give a kind of a brief explanation. So that is something which is being included in a reference. It can be used like in our pages. Whenever we are making a kind of a report, it can be used in a form of a footnote also. That means wherever we are, it happens when we are presenting any kind of a report which is based on a survey, and survey sometimes happens in the subject which we like geography. So there we mention all these kind of the things. Next is bibliography. So bibliography is something that means the listing, that means the source of information from where you have taken all these information that you have to quote in your bibliography. And always remember, it should always in alphabetical order. So if you are making a kind of a bibliography, it should always include the information and it should always include a kind of a listing which is given in an alphabetical order. Finally, the appendix. Appendix is something which contains any kind of an explanation that are too long for the footnotes. Footnotes can be used in the middle of your report, but if you need a kind of a long explanation, so or a clarification, and still if the reader want more kind of a clarification, so that can be given in the appendix. And finally, the glossary can be considered as a list of words and expression which need further kind of the explanation. So that is how we are going to make a report. So this is the form, or this can be considered as a structure of how do we frame a kind of a report which is based on a survey. And even if you will just go to your book, so they had given you samples, they had given you so many examples, and through those examples you can just get a kind of an idea how to make a kind of a report, how they had framed it, how they had written a kind of a summary, what all things they had mentioned. You have to go through it, you have to read the report, and then only you can frame that report. And in the end, they had given you some kind of an exercise, and through which you can make a report any or based on any kind of a topic of your interest. But again, as I'm telling you again, you have to practice it. The more you will practice, the more you will learn. And the questions are something which are going to come like this only. So now I'm going to discuss the other topic, and that is the topic which is reporting, how to report a kind of how how to make a kind of a report which is based on an experiment. So now the next topic which we are going to talk is reporting experiments. So sometimes what is experiment all about? Okay. So reporting experiment can be considered as that whenever we are there, whenever we people are working in any kind of a laboratory, so laboratory test or experiments, so they are not limited to any kind of a particular field. As in the beginning of my lecture, I gave you the example of the report or kind of a medical report which is based on a blood test. So that is so here where we people are saying that experiments, when we are talking about the experiment, they are carried out in various fields. That is, it can be physics, it can be medical technology, it can be bioscience, it can be fire science, anything. So if you are a student of a science, you have to perform plenty and plenty of experiments in laboratories. So these experiments will demand from you the ability to choose a suitable equipment to arrange various instruments accordingly or appropriately. So you have to make a kind of an observation, you have to record the reading and the reaction, and then finally we come to a kind of a conclusion. So finally you need a kind of a write a report on various steps you have taken while conducting that experiment. You have to find out your finding and you have to come up with your conclusion. So then only you will be able to write that report. So now the next slide shows what are the various steps in conducting an experiment. So whenever we people are conducting an experiment, always remember the first point which is being written over here is first identify the problem. So what does it mean? Before planning the actual experiment, one should have to understand the nature of the problem and the theory which is being associated with it. Because the theory, what it does, it explains the problem. The theory or the explanation has, of course, to be proved, but it helps in a formulation of a hypothesis. We cannot say that theories are always correct, but you can come up with a kind of a hypothesis, you can come up with a kind of a formula. And see, you cannot conduct, first of all, if you are conducting any kind of an experiment, you should have a clear idea about what is to be tested. That is something. There are few questions which any person should ask to himself. Why I am carrying out this experiment? What it will, why it is useful for me? Will it give a kind of an answer to my problem? Or uh, you should analyze the problem and you should put it in a very simple kind of a word. So that is how you can, in a very segregate manner, in a very separate kind of a manner, you can give the answers with your experiment. So that is something. And please always remember, record purpose and purpose of the experiment in a notebook or something which they are mentioning. That means always remember that observation is something which implies a selection. So you have to decide yourself. That means first of all, you have to arrange a kind of an apparatus. You should carefully see whether it suits you or not, then how you are going to, that means all the kind of the things, if you require a test tube, if you require any kind of a salt, or if you require any kind of a chemical, you should keep all these things, all the procedures should be there in your mind for conducting any kind of an experiment. And one thing is something which is very, very important. In your notebook, you should record carefully and accurately the details about the purpose of your experiment. So everything should be recorded. That means sometimes your experiment is something which can be successful, sometimes it cannot be successful. So that is how you are going to make a report. And then finally, you can use illustrations such as diagrams, you can use drawings, you can use graphs, maps, or tables. This is what we people have done in our schools days when we were doing our schooling also. Then also what we have done, we have formulated these, we have conducted certain kind of the experiments in the classrooms, which was based on the tests. So that is how we are going to make it. So with the help of an illustration, you can present a large number of details in a limited space. So that is something which is important, because if we show through illustration, it catches the reader's eye very quickly, and the message is something which is being conveyed effectively. So that is why we use charts and diagrams. And that is why diagram and drawings becomes a very essential part of report, which is based on a scientific experiment. So that is something which is very, very important. Sometimes if we are making a kind of a report that is based on a graph, so that is something where if we are presenting, so graph is something which is being presented in a mathematical data or any kind of a statistics. So there we use these kind of the picture graph. Okay, so that is, even we use maps if in order to show a kind of a geographical distribution of a data, and sometimes tables are also required. So that is how we make these kind of things. That means these are the various steps when in conducting a kind of an experiment. The next thing is, how do we report an experiment? So before reporting, so report, this is how we make a report. First of all, this is the structure. That means the subject. It should, or your report should always contain these kind of the contents. The subject should be there. What are the apparatus which is being used, or the other material, like which kind of the salt, which kind of the chemicals, is there any acid, water, whatever you might have used, all these things should be mentioned over there. Then the procedure, how you conducted that experiment. Then what were your observation, what was the time frame, and how the experiment was being conducted. And finally you have to, that means first of all you have to identify the experiment you are reporting on. Then you have to indicate the apparatus and the other materials which you have used. Then if the purpose of the experiment is not obvious for your reader, you should explain the body in the report. So that is something you have to explain the procedure, and you have to give a detailed explanation how you performed that experiment. And that is something which should also include your observation. Then comes the concluding part of the report, where you should give the results of your experiment. And if an interpretation of a result is going to be useful to the reader, you have to give it in the conclusion. You have to give a kind of an analysis in your conclusion, and that could include your recommendations also. Okay, so that is how we use it. So always remember, whenever you write a report, you have to find the clear sentences. You should always avoid jargons. You cannot use technical language. Your language should be very, very user friendly. And that is how your reports will be something which will become very, very clear. I can give you the example, like suppose if we have to make a kind of, like we are dealing a kind of a chemistry experiment, an experiment which is being conducted in our chemistry lab. How do we prepare a kind of a hydrogen gas, and how can we find its properties? So that means this is the topic, and that is the aim, to prepare the hydrogen gas. That is the subject. Second, what are the apparatus which we people have used? That means uh, anything, any kind of a wolf bottle, chisel, funnel, glass jars, whatever we people have used. Then what are the materials? Whether we have used sulfuric acid, dilute sulfuric acid, granulated zinc. These are the materials which we people have used. Then procedure is something that first of all, how we have set up the experiment, how we have conducted the experiment. So that is something which can be based on the diagram, how we have kept that can be drawn through diagram. And what is the procedure? What were your observation that how the gas evolved? How you can find, what are your finding that whether you were able to uh, find that the hydrogen gas uh, was there any hydrogen gas or not? What, how it was indicated? So all these things you should be mentioning whenever we are conducting any kind of an experiment. There are exercises which are given in your books. Just go through that. So that will be all, and I think I had completed this topic, which is being based on the report writing, and there should be no confusion till now. So now we are moving on to the another topic, and that topic is writing summary. But before writing summary, as I was telling you that we will be talking about one more thing, that is what a note taking is. Okay, so where we people are talking about note taking. So that means how do we make a note? How do we write a note? So that is something which we people are going to talk about, and this is what we are going to discuss. Because if a student is studying, okay, and if he is studying in any kind of a college or any kind of a university, or if he is working in any kind of an office, he has to take notes sometimes. Okay, so if he or she has to take notes, so sometimes when we are a student, like as I'm delivering a kind of a lecture in front of you, so some of you might be listening, some of you might be taking notes while listening to a lecture. So that is, or some of you must be just jotting out some main points which you are going to further study. So that is how we make a note. So first of all, whenever we are making a kind of a note, because why do we make a note? Sometimes we have to take an examination to improve our qualification to compete for a better job. That is also where we require a note. So that is where we, or sometimes we read certain kind of the books, and while we go through the books, what we do, we go through the certain kind of the note taking. So that is why the note taking is something which becomes very important, and that is where it says that there are usually two main reasons. That means to keep a kind of a record of a speaker or a writer main ideas, and then if we are revising for an examination, then also what is required? We require a kind of a note taking. So that is why note taking becomes very important. So that is the whole sole purpose, and that is why we make a kind of that is how we make a kind of a note. So whenever we read something, we generally read because we have a kind of a purpose, and then that purpose is something which is based on our kind of a study, and that is how we read and we make a kind of a note. So now moving on to the next topic, and the next topic is something which is talking about how to write a summary. So wherever we people are talking about what a summary is, this is what my next slide is mentioning right in front of you. So if we define a summary, so summary is a significant induction of the reduction of a original source. So that is how we define. That means whenever we reduce something, okay, so that is something which is being defined as a summary. So how do we write a summary or how do we mention a summary? So whenever we people are talking about what a summary is, so effective summary is something which can be considered as a very concise, a passage which comes into a kind of a very shorter term, and it communicates what is essential and what is required. So that is how we frame a kind of a summary. So summary is something which becomes important over there. So sometimes what happens, there are certain kind of the passages which are being given to us, and when we use those kind of the passages, then finally what happens? We prepare a kind of a summary on that. So now the next thing which we are going to discuss, that what are the major characteristics of an effective summary. So whenever we are writing a summary, so in that summary, first of all, we always focus on the main idea rather than the minor point. So if we are summarizing something, so that means our main consideration is something which is based on the main idea rather than the minor points. Next thing, it is something which is of a shorter document because it is shorter than the original document. It does not include any kind of a quotation. If we are writing a summary, we will always remember that we do not require any kind of a quotation. Then the order of the ideas which needs to be consistent should be of the author's purpose, tone, and attitude, but it doesn't need to follow the original order. So that is how we write a summary. And another thing, if we are quoting any kind of a summary, it should always function as an independent text. So that is how we form a kind of a summary. If you just go through your book, you will find so many kind of the examples which will be given to you, and there will be certain kind of the passages, and through those passages what is being expected out of you people, that you all have to jot down the main summary. You just have to frame the summary, and these are the process how to write an effective summary. So if we are writing a main summary, first of all, you have to determine the main idea of the piece you have to read or view. Like there are so many kind of and examples which are being given, that you have to read a kind of a passage about volcano and how the fiery substance they threw out with the force and affect large part of the earth. So that is, if you have to write a kind of a summary on a volcanic impact or a volcanic effect, so how you are going to write a summary? So that is the main idea or the central idea. Then you have to write one sentence that captures the main idea in that summary. So that means if you are talking about or any kind of the piece of a writing where you are mentioning, so that is something which you are going to mention in your summary. As you read or view the note the major areas of the evidence that the piece provides. So that is how if you are summarizing the main content, so you are going to explain all those kind of the things which is being mentioned over there in the summary. So this is how you can write it. Then write one sentence that communicates the gist of each of these major areas. So that is how we write an effective summary. So that is the process of writing an effective summary. Apart from that, whenever we are writing, you have to be very sure that you use your own words. So the originality of the word is something which is very, very important. So if you are writing or if you are framing any kind of a summary, you have to make sure that you have to use all your words, and all the words which is being presented, they should be very, very systematic. So something something which is very, very important if you are uh, writing a kind of a summary. Second thing is, if you are writing, just make sure that the word limit should be very proper, very systematic. It should be short. If you are writing a summary, it should be objective. The approach with which you are writing, it should be very objective, and that these are the few points which I had given to you. And through this, what we people can do, we people can write the summary. So that will be all for today. I think I had very briefly covered so many segments, and very clearly I had mentioned the 2 points, and that is what we are going to discuss. So now the house is open for the open discussion. So just give me 1 minute. Let me just stop sharing my screen. Yeah. So is there any other question which you have to ask? So there are few things which we people have discussed today. Number one, we people were talking about um, note taking. Then we people were talking about the reporting. How do we make a report? What is a brief structure of a report? Apart from that, we were talking about, I just took in a very broadened form, I was explaining that how we make a kind of a report. Which is based on an event, which is based on a meeting, which is based on a kind of a table, or which is based on a survey, which is based on an experiment. So is there any question which any student is having right now? Let me see in the chat box if you have. Okay, so since there is no question, okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, from you.
Okay, I hope you have understood the concept. Now what I am expecting, you all the students are requested that you all are going to just go through the books which are being available, and just go through the content of my lecture was from the Gyan Kosh books of FEG. So that is the only thing which I had discussed with you with an exam centric point of view and your assignment centric point of view. The thing is, now you have to practice those examples, you have to go through it. The more you will practice, the more you will learn. So that is something which is important for all you people. So that is done. Just give me 1 minute. If you are having any question, you can just ask it. Okay, so no questions. So now I have only one session which is left with you people, and that is the last session on 30th. So we are going to have one more session, and in that, if you have any question and answer, or if you have any problem, so what you can do, you can just come up, you can just ask those questions. So that is how we can do it. No question from your side. So
Sorry, sir. I have a question about exam. Um, we must read all of these books, sir, ma'am.
yeah, it does. See, if you will just go through the content of the book is something which is very systematic and which is very organized. Okay, you are being given four blocks, and all the blocks contain different units, and these are something which are very practice kind of the books. There are so many exercises, there are so many units, and you just have to go through it, you have to practice, and then only you will understand. So that is the only thing which you have to do.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. See, the recording is something which is already available. So you can just go through the recorded lectures. They are online. So if you will just go to the regional center website, you can find the recorded lecture of each and every program. Okay. Thank you everyone for listening patiently with such a kind of a patience, and thank you so much. And I hope all your queries are resolved. Again, if you are having any kind of a query, you can ask the questions. Otherwise, we can just end the session. So no questions from anyone's side.
No question, ma'am. Have a good day.
Okay. Thank you so
Thank you, ma'am, for all of the lectures.
Thank you so much for listening it patiently with your all your patience. And I hope you have taken something from all these lectures. Just practice it at home. and that will be helpful for you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye.